and welcome back to my channel. It's been a minute, but that's okay, because, time doesn't stop. For anyone. Welcome back to another episode of Do I Have Enough Free Time to Do This? Let's find out. Today we'll be diving into the fun and exciting time of the video game crash of 1983. Let's get into it. Prior to 1983, the video games industry was on the up and up. Everyone was still hot for arcades and those silly little games they had inside of them. From Pac-Man to Donkey Kong to Galaga to Space Invaders to those last two I thought were the same game until I realized they weren't. People could not get enough of this stuff. Separate from the arcade games market, there were now also home consoles. In 1972, Magnavox released the Magnavox Odyssey. Think Pong. People began to warm up to the idea of having video games in their home, letting them take a seat on their couch, maybe even offering them a home-cooked meal. Flash forward to 1982. The US arcade game market is worth about $4.3 billion, and the home video game market was worth about $3.8 billion. On the surface, things seemed to be going okay. People were relatively happy playing on their consoles, and the people making them were relatively happy with their massive streams of income. Unfortunately for them, this was all about to change. Don't ask me how the pre-crash is different from before. I just thought it made sense to separate it out like that. Before the crash began, things began to go awry in the home video game industry. There are a few main reasons for why the video game crash even happened in the first place. For starters, there was approximately 3 billion consoles on the market in 1982. Here's a list of some of the best-selling consoles on the market. Atari 2600, the Game & Watch, the Coleco Mini Arcade, the Intellivision, the Timex Sinclair 1000, the Atari 400, the Atari 800, the Commodore 64, ColecoVision. That's more than two, so that's a lot. Not only were there 100,000 different consoles for people to choose from at the time, but they all kind of did the same thing. You might be thinking, don't the Xbox and the PlayStation and the Nintendo all do the same thing too? I don't know. Look at the freaking exclusives and the crap that makes you buy all the damn consoles. Anyway, some systems, like the ColecoVision, had attachments that allowed you to play games meant for other systems. The Atari 2600. These days, you don't really see a little plug-in for your PlayStation so you can go pop a little Mario card in there, right? Like, that's illegal. So all these consoles kind of did the same thing. They could all run the same games. There were just 100,000 of them. This is but one piece of the puzzle. So let's explore the next reason for the video game crash. That's right, folks, too much of anything is a bad thing, especially when the thing there's too much of is also bad. Much like the mobile app store today, third-party games were not uncommon to see on the market. Not all games had that fancy little PS5 or Nintendo Switch or Xbox, I don't know what that's called. Various companies could go off and do their own thing. For example, a couple devs from Atari left because they were, fed up with being underpaid, not having their names on the things they were making, so they went off and built their own game studio. This studio, Activision, was known for releasing high-quality and interesting games such as Pitfall, River Raid, and Kaboom. Not all third-party games were bad, however, they weren't all good, and there were a lot of them. The oversaturation of games on the market can be attributed to a few things. One of those being corporate greed. Once corporations realized they could release games too, they began to do so with reckless abandon. Games like Chase the Chuckwagon began to be released. This particular one focusing on Purina Dog Chow. Of course, what else? This wasn't just corporations releasing bad games though. There were tons of other poorly made third-party games flooding the market as well. You may be thinking, surely third-party game developers cannot be the only ones to blame. And you're right. Atari apparently decided they would also try to get in on that action. In March of 1982, Atari released Pac-Man for the Atari 2600. Pac-Man was extremely popular at the time. So Atari, very confident in their game that they were releasing, ordered 12 million copies to be created, which, when you realize there was only 10 million Atari 2600 consoles in people's homes at the time, they were expecting to sell 2 million more consoles to go along with those games. You can see how that might be a little cocky. Well, Atari sold 7 million of those copies, and it was the best-selling game of 1982. However, the game was rushed through production and released early. We all know how that goes. So many of the copies were just returned back to Atari because they looked like this. After this very public failure, Atari actually decided they hadn't had enough of it. They went on to spend $21 million for the licensing to make an E.T. video game. Then Warner gave the devs 6 weeks to make a video game so it'd be on shelves in time for the holiday season. Now 6 weeks was not near enough time to make even a passable video game. Like, that shit's hard. The final product was considered to be a bad game. The devs hated it, the audience hated it, so as a bit of a businessman myself, I know that that's when you're selling a good product. Atari made 5 million copies of the E.T. video game and sold 4 million of them, but they also had 3.5 million returned to them. After this overwhelming success, the home video games industry crumpled to the ground. The oversaturation of consoles and poorly made games had finally done its damage. Consumers lost faith in the product quality and the industry crashed in 1983. Lots of other companies that made games or consoles went under. Atari announced that its revenue had dropped by 50%. The company had lost $500 million and laid off large portions of its staff by the end of 1983. So that was the end of video games. Just kidding, got you. Contrary to popular belief, the US is not the only country on Earth. Japan and Europe's video game markets were fine. They were relatively unaffected by what was happening in the great US of A. In Europe, people were really getting into 8-bit computers, which could not only run games, but also do word processing and accounting and other adult stuff. You know, not just kid crap. Europe saw the popularity of the BBC Micro, the ZX Spectrum, and the Commodore 64 on the rise. Japan saw Nintendo release the Famicom, and Sega released the SG-1000 in 1983. So home video games were alive and well, just not in the US. Since we live in what would be considered the future in 1983, we know that video games didn't die forever. At the time, it seemed like home video games were just going to be another thing the kids were into these days. But lucky for all you gamers out there, Nintendo swooped in to save the day. Remember the Famicom, released in 1983 in Japan? It was later released in the US as the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1985. The NES was actually designed to look more like a VCR and avoided using the term video game in order to sway US audiences into purchasing it. After the crash, developers began to put more focus on developing video games for home computers since they were becoming more popular in US homes. The re-emergence of the home video game market saw a lot less companies making consoles involved, considering a bunch of them just kinda beefed it during the crash. These companies did take some lessons away from this event, mainly regulating the games that were released for each console. Gone were the days of the Wild West of console game production. Fuck, I ran out of space again? Gone were the days of the Wild West of console game production. Companies like Nintendo, for example, would only release officially licensed games for their consoles, keeping up a carefully curated library of titles for consumers to choose from, rather than a mishmash of crap for you to roll around in. So 1985 saw the resurgence of the home video game market in the US, mainly thanks to Nintendo, and not so much Atari over there, oopsies. In conclusion, corporations will not hesitate to ruin anything and everything you love and care about if they can make a quick buck. So that's the gist of what the video game crash of 1983 was all about. There are lots of good videos and good articles out there that help make this video possible, so I will link those down below. I love releasing videos 1 time per year. So if you even thought about liking this video or enjoying it, then you should probably like and subscribe right now. Or not. I don't care. Join me next time where I wait so long to make a video that I forget how to type. Bye!